2 preseason games are enough to tell you when something is off, and right now, the Indiana Fever are giving everyone the same uncomfortable feeling twice in a row. It's not just about losing rebounds or missing shots. It's about a pattern that keeps repeating itself in a way that's starting to raise real questions about how this roster is built and what it's actually supposed to do when the regular season begins. When you watch the Indiana Fever in these early games, the first thing that stands out is how predictable their offense becomes the moment the ball hits the perimeter. Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell are doing what elite guards do. They push the tempo, they collapse defenses, and they create opportunities. But the problem is what happens behind them, or more accurately, what doesn't happen at all. The Fever's front court simply isn't forcing defenses to react. And in modern WNBA basketball, that's basically an invitation for opponents to clog the paint, sit on driving lanes, and wait for the guards to run into traffic. That's exactly what's happening right now, and 2 different teams have already exposed it in the same way. Against Dallas, the rebounding gap told the entire story without needing much explanation. Dallas pulled down 45 rebounds while Indiana managed just 26. That's not a small difference, that's a structural gap. And when you break it down further, it becomes even more concerning because this wasn't about one bad quarter or a few unlucky bounces. It was consistent physical control of the glass from start to finish. What makes it even more alarming is that Indiana was missing Aaliyah Boston in that game. And Boston is not just any piece in this system. She is arguably the most important interior presence on the roster. She averages close to 8 rebounds in her normal production. So even if you plug her back into that Dallas matchup hypothetically, the Fever still would have been significantly behind in second chance opportunities. That's the kind of math that quietly decides games before the fourth quarter even starts. And Dallas wasn't even the first team to expose it. The New York Liberty did the same thing in the opening preseason matchup. 2 completely different opponents, 2 completely different styles, but the same outcome. They both controlled the paint, both dominated the boards, and both forced Indiana into a game where every possession felt harder than it needed to be. When that happens once, you adjust. When it happens twice in a row, you start looking at the roster itself. Right now, Indiana's front court rotation is leaning on players like Monique Billings, Myisha Hines-Allen, Michaela Timpson, and Deonta Davis. The issue isn't effort. The issue is spacing and role definition. None of them are perimeter threats. None of them stretch the floor in a way that forces opposing bigs to leave the paint. So, defenders stay home, pack the lane, and wait for Clark and Mitchell to arrive. That's where everything breaks down. Because once defenders don't have to respect the outside shot from the forwards, the entire geometry of Indiana's offense collapses. Driving lanes disappear, post touches get crowded before they even develop, and every rebound becomes a group fight under the rim where Indiana is often outnumbered. Head coach Stephanie White didn't hide her frustration after the Dallas game either. The message was clear. The team wasn't connected defensively, the urgency wasn't there, and the rebounding effort simply wasn't at the level needed to compete. The tone wasn't casual concern. It sounded more like a coach seeing a deeper issue that effort alone can't solve. And that's where things start to get complicated for Indiana. Because this isn't just about hustle. It's about roster construction. The modern WNBA has shifted toward versatility, especially in the front court. Teams that can shoot from the 4 and 5 positions create spacing that unlocks everything for their guards. Indiana, at least in these preseason looks, doesn't have that yet. That's why Aaliyah Boston's role becomes even more important. She is a traditional interior big, and she does that job at a high level. She finishes through contact, she rebounds, she anchors the paint, but even she needs space to operate effectively. And right now, Indiana's forwards are not creating that space because opposing defenders don't have to respect them beyond 5 feet from the basket. So, when Boston catches the ball in the post, help defense is already there. When Clark drives, bodies are already waiting. And when Indiana shoots from the perimeter, there's no interior presence pulling defenders away from the rim. That imbalance is what's causing the rebounding issues and the offensive stagnation to happen at the same time. On top of that, there's been growing attention around Justine Pissott, the 6'4" forward the Fever drafted, with the expectation that she could help solve exactly this problem. Coming out of Vanderbilt, she brought a reputation as a stretch forward who could shoot from outside and defend multiple positions. In theory, she is exactly the type of player Indiana needs to open the floor. But her current situation has become one of the more talked about points around the team. She has posted messages on social media that suggest frustration with how her injury status is being discussed publicly, and that has only added more speculation around her role and availability moving forward. Nothing official suggests anything beyond a normal early season injury process, but the timing has definitely created noise around her place in the rotation. And that matters because Indiana didn't draft her by accident. They drafted her because they needed a forward who could stretch the floor. That's the entire idea. A player who can step out to the three-point line and force opposing bigs to follow her, opening driving lanes for Clark and clearing space for Boston inside. That's what a modern stretch four does. It changes everything without needing the ball in her hands for long stretches. Without that kind of presence, Indiana's offense becomes predictable. Defenses can sit in the paint, switch less aggressively, and focus entirely on stopping Clark's penetration while collapsing on Boston the moment she touches the ball. This is why some analysts have started bringing up names like Cameron Brink in broader roster discussions. Brink is already an established WNBA presence with defensive versatility, rebounding ability, and the kind of floor spacing threat that can actually shift defensive attention. She fits the exact profile Indiana appears to be missing. If you pair a forward like Brink with Aaliyah Boston, suddenly the front court balance changes. Defenders can't just sit in the paint anymore. Someone has to step out. And the moment that happens, Caitlin Clark's entire game opens up in a way we haven't fully seen yet in these preseason looks. That's the core issue here. It's not about talent at the top. Clark, Boston, Mitchell, they are more than enough to compete. The question is whether the pieces around them actually complement their strengths or unintentionally limit them. There have been flashes of what this team could look like when everything clicks. In transition, Clark pushes the pace and finds shooters quickly. Boston is effective when she's not immediately doubled. Mitchell stretches defenses when her shot is falling. Even players like Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull add energy and spacing on the perimeter. But none of that matters if the paint is constantly packed and Indiana is losing nearly 20 rebounds in a game. That's why these preseason performances feel more like warnings than meaningless early games. They are showing Indiana exactly where opponents will attack once the regular season begins. Even individual performances from Raven Johnson have added another layer to this conversation. Her defensive energy has been one of the bright spots, with steals, rebounds, and disruptive perimeter pressure giving Indiana a different kind of guard option off the bench. But even her impact highlights the same issue. Guards can disrupt, but they cannot fix a front court that doesn't stretch the floor. What makes Johnson interesting is how quickly she has adapted to the professional level. She plays with intensity, reads passing lanes well, and brings a defensive mindset that fits modern rotations. But again, she is part of the backcourt solution, not the frontcourt spacing problem. And that brings everything back to the same point. Indiana's biggest issue isn't effort, it's structure. When you build a roster around a generational guard like Caitlin Clark, the expectation is simple. You surround her with spacing, shooting, and frontcourt versatility that forces defenses to make choices. Right now, Indiana is not forcing those choices consistently enough. The result is predictable. Defenses collapse, rebounding battles get harder, and offensive possessions become more difficult difficult than they need to be. The good news is that this is still preseason. Adjustments can be made, roles can be refined, and rotations can evolve before the games actually count. But the warning signs are already there. 2 games, 2 rebounding problems, 2 opponents controlling the paint, and a front court that still hasn't shown it can stretch the floor in a meaningful way. Whether Indiana addresses that internally, leans more into player development like Justine Pissott, or explores outside options in the future will shape how far this team can realistically go in 2026. Because right now, the Indiana Fever don't have a star problem. They have a spacing problem. And in today's WNBA, that might be the difference between a playoff push and